folks listening and watching the Reimagine Public Safety debate hosted by Imagine Black and produced by Labs, we are getting into question 3. If you can bear with me, this is a long one, so I have a lot to read, but let's get into it. So Portland, along with other cities across the nation, is experiencing a rise in houselessness driven by the lack of affordable housing. The ongoing COVID pandemic has economically wrecked entire communities, devastated households, and a significant and continued lack of access to mental health services, including healthcare-centered substance use treatment, disorder treatment. Despite credible research, and again, credible research, showing that police sweeps of houseless encampments don't solve houselessness and fail to lead to effective housing solutions. Again, I'm going to bring that back. Despite credible research showing that police sweeps of houseless encampments do not solve houselessness and fail to lead to effective housing solutions, city resources continue to support this harmful practice. So my question, and we're going to start with you, Angelita, this time, how will you prevent displacement of houseless communities and elevate real solutions that result in vulnerable Portlanders finding and maintaining housing? Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. We know that sweeps are incredibly costly to the city. I believe, if I'm recalling correctly, it's around $16 million a year just for sweeps alone. And when I did constituent services at the city of Portland, I was the person answering the calls from neighbors who were upset about an encampment near their house, in a park, etc. And what I saw is that if a sweep did end up happening, the neighbors got what they wanted. Usually 3 days later, those same people would be back in that area because they had no shelter spaces available for them to go to, and or they were inaccessible to people for whatever reason. If it's a family, sometimes you have to separate your family when you go into a shelter. Sometimes if you have a physical disability, it's inaccessible. Unless you have low barrier shelters as well, there are people dealing with different issues, including addiction, that maybe those shelters aren't going to be accessible to them. So really, it was just pushing people from sidewalk to sidewalk and not getting to the heart of the issue. So to me, I think that we should reallocate the funding from sweeps. Unless it's like hazardous for some reason, then we need to reallocate the majority of that money into creating the supportive services that we would like to see. And to me, part of that is going to include detox centers and treatment centers that are longer than 24 hours. Something that's happening in District 3 is that we have a 24-hour detox center that is being opened very quickly, and it's kind of a rushed job from the county because they're trying to prevent people from being turned into our local jails instead, now that House Bill 4002 has passed. And what we're seeing is that that's not an effective amount of treatment because it's kind of a revolving door. You're just sending people in who aren't getting properly treated, and they're getting sent back out. So I would love to see this funding instead be used for creating actually accessible shelter spaces that are, or housing that is informed by the people that are going to be using these services. I work a lot with folks at Right to Dream 2, which is an encampment where folks are autonomously organized. They have a council where they make decisions together, and I visited that shelter numerous times. You don't see the same levels of violence that you do in other spaces because people are communally making decisions together. So I'd love to see more investments that give people their power back.
Thank you so much. Same question to you, and we'll give you a little bit more time in 2 minutes as well. How will you prevent displacement of the houseless communities and elevate real solutions that result in vulnerable Portlanders finding and maintaining housing?
So, I mean, as the question says, the houselessness problem is primarily driven by a lack of affordable housing. That is not a problem that I think we are going to really solve anytime soon. We have a housing shortage of tens of thousands of units in the metro area. And especially with interest rates the way they are now, we are not going to build tens of thousands of units overnight. There's some things that we can do in terms of changing zoning, permitting, et cetera, and Angelita talks about some of this on her website, as I do on mine. They could speed the production of housing, but we are not within sight of having enough housing for everybody. So unfortunately, we are going to continue to have a level of homelessness for quite some time. I think that we need to find more humane places for people to go. The tiny house villages have been rather successful. I mean, people appreciate having a door to close so they feel safer. They can have their partner there. They can have their dog there. One thing that you hear when you talk to the city is that, well, there's just not enough locations where you can put the tiny house villages. But I talked to somebody high up in the city who said, well, maybe so, but so far that job is being done by like political staff out of the mayor's office. If it's a priority, then you should hire a small staff of professional people. Their job it is to find those locations. And then the city could go to the county and say, you've got the money to actually run these things and maybe pay for the tiny houses. We've got a site for you to do it. So, I mean, ideally, you have locations for people to go, which are humane. I would say that I'm not unalterably opposed to all sweeps. I mean, there are locations where near a homeless encampment, there's a profusion of crime. I've talked to people in the building trades who say that they're working on building sites that are near a homeless encampment. Their equipment gets stolen, they get harassed. And as a homeless guy said, when I was in the council, it can be hard to distinguish between, as he put it, the peaceful hobos and the thugs. But I think that there are places where you can't, if you can't identify the specific wrongdoers, that there's no choice but to actually do a sweep when the homeless camp has become a focus of crime.
Thank you for that. I have some follow-up. So much there. I'll fall back to you really quickly, just because I know that quote you mentioned was from someone else that you were summarizing. You used the word thug.
That's what he said.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
How
he said hobos too.
He said
Peaceful
hobos. I was like, whoo, I'm feeling it. I think there is, and again, I keep referencing the Street Roots article and their series of articles, but they talked a lot about how there's this perception that, just when you see a houseless person on the street, that they are automatically criminals in some ways, or that they're up to no good. In reality, they reported that actually they're experiencing quite a lot of crimes towards them constantly. And it's really interesting, I would say, as our society that it's automatically assumed that. Let's go back to what you mentioned a little bit earlier. I think we often, as we talk about solutions to houselessness, or we try to figure out what the problem is, I feel like we talk a lot about housing, as we should. But as an org that is a part of the Anti-Displacement PDX Coalition, we also talk about economic development. We talk about the things that are rising up the price of housing. We may not be able to build as quickly as the need is, and I have some thoughts on that I'll share a little bit later, but what is our role as the city around economic development, and how do we actually think about the rising cost of our current housing? I'll pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks for getting back to us on this, because I was just thinking something that I just experienced in my apartment building is that my rent was raised significantly more than a friend's rent who was in the same exact size and unit. And I'm Latina, and this has happened to my family numerous times in Portland, where we found out our rent was illegally raised beyond the threshold in order to kick Latinos out of the building. And then, now I'm a rental services commissioner, and I know my rights and everything a little bit more, so I can advocate for myself. But it made me look more into the city's, the building services, and we found out that they're using AI software called RealPage, which is being used to artificially inflate the cost of rent in the entire country, because landlords are using the AI software to confer with each other in order to raise the cost of rent everywhere. And we're seeing other cities actually take a look into some of this software and ban this type of AI software so that landlords can't work together to artificially increase the cost of rent. I think that's something I would love to see Portland do, especially since the federal government has already started suing RealPage, and they're taking an interest in this as well. I think they'd be a helpful partner. So I think as far as housing, that's something to look into as well, because I don't think that these costs are actually supposed to be this high. I think that they are being artificially inflated. I think everything that Steve said about building more housing is important. And I think as far as revitalizing our districts, we're very lucky in District 3. We have a beautiful district that is it's pretty much flourishing. I think something that I'm really interested in is the economic development and transportation development of 82nd Avenue, and making sure that that area of town has access to rapid, frequent, reliable, and safe transportation so that people can go shopping in that district and just use it more often. So I think that using transportation and environmental design to revitalize our communities is something I'm interested in.
Thank you so much. A similar question to you. I know extensive environmental background, but thinking about economic development, what's the role the city will play? And if we can't build as quickly as the need is, how do we ensure that the prices aren't rising and folks are getting into houselessness through that?
Well, I really appreciate what Angelita said about the use of AI software to artificial. And I think Elizabeth Warren is trying to take that on at the federal level, and it would be interesting to see what the city can do at the local level. But I do think that the cost of housing, and this is a national problem, and even an international problem, it's not just Portland, is largely driven by our failure to produce enough housing. And there was just an article in the New York Times about how after the housing crunch with the in 2008, the subprime loan thing, the banks became a lot more cautious about investing in housing, and that combined with the barriers, like the legal barriers there are to creating housing, which we in Oregon are starting to climb out of a bit. I actually was an early proponent in the council in 2015 of allowing more duplexes and triplexes to be built in what had been single-family zoned areas. But I think that it is largely a supply and demand thing. This article at the Times talked about how Kalamazoo, Michigan, the prices are skyrocketing because not enough housing is being built. As far as economic development is concerned, I think actually governments spend a lot of time pursuing, quote, economic development strategies, which, are kind of fake. And I think that the best economic development strategy a city can follow is try to make the city as livable and humane as possible, and have amenities like, as Angelita was saying, bus rapid transit on 82nd Avenue, and having parks, and having trees. And if you're a nice place to live, particularly Portland for years was had a booming economy, and it wasn't because we had lots of Fortune 500 companies. We don't have a major university, but companies wanted to come here because they knew their employees would want to live here. So I think that the best economic development strategy Portland can follow is to invest in making Portland a nice place to live, rather than having some, complicated, here's our economic development strategy for the 21st century.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you bringing that in. Also, someone who was really excited about this idea about the bus rapid transit system that never materialized. Have some thoughts on that. Well, you know what? I have to ask because, Prosper Portland is obviously within the city's portfolio, even though it's kind of a weird, interesting relationship. I have to talk about TIF, TIF district. Urban renewal is what people call it, but the tax increment financing, if I'm not mistaken, is either within your district or really, really close in terms of right now the city council is going to be weighing in on whether or not to bring TIF to the space. From our analysis, both with Imagine Black and the anti-displacement PDX is, that program was designed to increase property value. It was designed to actually raise the price. And what does that mean for renters? Someone like myself, as a renter, I live in North Portland. I think a lot about the role that Prosper Portland played in the gentrification and the displacement of Black Oregonians in North and Northeast Portland that have been pushed out to many different parts of the states, and in some ways they left the state completely because they can't find a way to live here affordably. I'm interested, do you have any thoughts about TIF or just the role of Prosper Portland in economic development?
To be frank, I feel like I need to learn more about TIF districts. It's a newer issue for me, and working campaigning has taken up most of my time.
For sure.
But hearing that just from you, and it sounds like you guys have a lot of expertise to share with us as candidates and potential city council members, if there is something that is going to increase the cost of living for everyday Portlanders, and particularly for Black and Brown Portlanders, then that's not something that I would be in support of, because I want to make sure that the people that are actually living in our city, that are working in all of our stores, our coffee shops, everything that make Portland the lovely place that it is, they deserve to live a life of dignity and not be so stressed out about money, the cost of rent, the cost of food, everything. So I would actually love to learn more from you guys about what the research is showing about TIF districts and how they impact BIPOC communities.
Thank you for that. I am looking forward to chatting a little bit more about that. I'll pass it to you. I know TIF was something obviously that was discussed when you were in council, as well as some of the conversations with the anti-displacement PDX way back when. Let's talk about what it looked like and what plans you may have for Prosper Portland and its role in TIF in general.
So I am always a bit skeptical about using TIF because TIF is actually a way for the city to steal money from the county and the schools and its own general fund to spend on something else because the property taxes don't go to the, the increase in property tax value doesn't go to the county, doesn't go to the schools, and gets set aside in the context of the city. So I think just for that reason, it's something that should be used very sparingly. Before I was on the council, Eric Stinn pushed hard, as I recall, to get 30% of TIF money spent on affordable housing. And then while I was there, I can't remember if it was an official policy, but at least for some new districts, Nick Fish pushed to get 50% of the money from TIF spent on affordable housing. And there were some circumstances where TIF districts were used to improve, add transportation amenities, which as a transportation commissioner, I liked. So I think that it's a tool that should be used carefully and selectively when it can increase the supply of affordable housing, when it can add important amenities. I confess that I haven't tracked closely enough particular proposals that are on the table now, but that's sort of my general attitude, is to address it very cautiously and remember that the money is not really free. It comes from other public services, so you have to really justify it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Definitely looking forward to chatting with folks around TIF, and it's getting, the process is moving very, very quickly in a way that I have never seen in the city before. I want to bring us back because I know I'm almost out of time for this question, and thank you so much for going on a fun journey with me around housing and planning, something that I love talking about as it relates to public housing. We love imagination. That's not a surprise here. We love even more when we're able to put some action items and some policies behind it. Going back to sweeps, just a quick question. Knowing that, sweeps cost us a lot of money, and I'm hearing from a little bit of both of you about wanting to use money more effectively. If you could use the money for something else, just crystal ball here, what would you think would be a good opportunity? I'm going to pass it to you first.
I think a really good opportunity, I think something that would be really easy to do with the money would be to help fund more. And I don't think that shelters are an immediate it's not a long-term solution. I would love to focus more on housing, but I think as a quick solution for some of the sweeps would be to start funding shelter models like Right to Dream. The folks there created that shelter actually autonomously. They took an empty lot on Burnside that the city had left unused for years. They negotiated with the owner of the lot and they rented it for $1 a year. And they set up an autonomous encampment that has tiny houses. I was talking with them recently because I visit them semi-regularly, and they were telling me that they're running that space for $65,000 a year. Which is crazy because that is not the cost of most services, and they're running something that's actually very holistic, where people are getting the help that they need at a place to stay. And I've talked to a lot of folks that have transitioned into permanent housing there. But I have a lot of concerns about shelter models as they're being created right now, especially with Urban Alchemy. I think that they have a history of having some staff abuse to the people that use the resource, and that happens because there is a disparate power between the unhoused people that are using the services and the people that are running the shelters. And I'm not saying that those people are villains. I'm just saying that that's par for the course when you have so much power over an individual that is so vulnerable. But at Right to Dream, because they have a council of the unhoused people that are actually collectively making decisions together, there is safety because they have their own power within that space. So that's something that I would love to see. It would be fairly inexpensive to set up, and we could actually give people the dignity they need rather than just pushing them from sidewalk to sidewalk. So,
Thank you for that. Same question to you. If you had almost a crystal ball, how would you spend this money? Well, maybe not just crystal ball, policy. What are you thinking?
Well, first of all, I do want to say that $16 million is a lot of money, but it doesn't compare to the needs that we have. I mean, we need literally billions of dollars to to address the housing shortage that we have. We should have hundreds of millions of dollars a year for drug treatment. So it's not like $16 million is going to really go all that far in terms of solving bigger problems. I would agree with Angelita that since it's related to houselessness, investing that money in high quality shelter options makes sense. One thing that I did want to mention before we leave here is that, I've said that the city talks about the absence of locations to put tiny house villages or other forms of humane shelter. The the city happens to own some large plots of land known as golf courses. I've asked, somebody in the city, have you considered using that land? And she said, well, we talked to people about that and it doesn't work because there's too many slopes, the photography doesn't work. And then I talked to a builder who said, I build on slopes all the time, and I can think of 3 of the golf courses that are definitely worth exploring. So that's something in particular. And I have nothing against golf. I realize golf is no longer something that only rich people play. I have nothing against public golf courses. But as far as I know, we do not have a golf crisis in the city of Portland. We do have a houselessness crisis. So that's one specific thing that I'd want to take a look at.
Thank you so much for that.
I love that.
Yeah, I see some synergy here.
I think Joanne Hardesty's talked about that too several
She
years
tried
ago.
to do it, but the golf people are quite intense. It would be a process for sure to get public buy-in.
I was gonna say they're watching and they're gonna have some things to say, but
There aren't. They've got these clubs.